And welcome back to Sports Talk. Doug Miles, Don Henderson with you. And right now I want to bring on our guest of the evening. Written really a great book for all you Redskin fans out there. You don't have to be a Redskin fan, but a football fan from those great Washington teams from the 80s, the Joe Gibbs years. It's called Hail to the Redskins, Gibbs, the Diesel, the Hogs, and the glory days of DC's football dynasty. We're joined today by Adam Lazarus, who wrote the book, a great author and sports writer. And Adam, good to have you with us. How are you tonight?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
You wrote about the era where it goes back to those great rivalries with Dallas, of course, Giants and all that. But the Joe Gibbs years, he had two regimes with Washington. But the first one is really the one people remember: the Hogs and guys like John Riggins, and of course the great quarterbacks they had. 3 quarterbacks won 3 Super Bowls. First of all, what gave you the impetus to write the book at this time?
Well, Gibbs was the reason. I was wanted to do a book on this era. This is sort of the era I grew up learning about football as a kid during this time, but definitely became a fan during this period. And I was thinking about the giant figures of that era, and Gibbs is certainly one of them. And I was kind of surprised that no one had done a real hard target story on Gibbs and everything he achieved, and that's what I wanted to do. And I started down that path, but the more and more I got deeper into the story and reading about the other players and the GM and the owner and everybody, I thought the whole group made for a fantastic book, and I think it came out that way.
He was a little bit different personality-wise, very intuitive to the game itself, and the second time he came back, things were a little bit different, but he really turned that program right into a consistent winner.
Yeah, you've mentioned the second time around. They sure didn't win a Super Bowl. That's true. There's no doubt about it. They didn't get nearly as much success as they had the second time. But I thought what Gibbs did in that second period was really special for him to come back away from the game for more than 10 years, came back and ran very similar styles on offense that had been so successful in the 80s, and in a way that it proved that his scheme and his sort of approach to the game was timeless. Like I said, they didn't win the Super Bowl, but they did get to the playoffs twice. They won a playoff game. They overcame a lot of obstacles to get to the playoffs. And I think in a way that second year, some people would probably suggest that it tainted Gibbs' record. I don't think so at all. I think it anything enhanced his record. So I think that, and this is something I sort of tackle in the book, I think that second time around is really a unique place for a guy like that to come back in the NFL and achieve some level of success. That's just proof of the power of Joe Gibbs.
They were saying at the time, the game had passed him by. It wasn't the same type of offense and different defenses, that he played against the first time. Do you buy into that, or what do you think the reason was it wasn't quite as successful?
Well, I think more than anything, I think, what you're saying, there is some truth to that. There was more of a passing league, and the game had adapted with everything from free agency and salary cap to, everything to the radios and the helmets and two-point conversion and the TV expansion and everything. That was probably part of it. But more than anything, I think the players were a little different. Charles Mann, who was a great player for the Redskins, told me a great story that's in the book. He said, I was talking to him about this, about whether or not, what he thought about Gibbs coming back a second time around. And he said that Gibbs used to not threaten them too harshly, but he would threaten his players in the early 80s and mid-80s. If we cut you, you're going to be selling insurance, or you're going to be on the street doing, whatever you to make ends meet. And the guys in this age, that's not how it is. They get their money, and you can't threaten them with going back to life of an average Joe, because they've already collected a check for $600,000 or whatever. So I thought that was a really neat little insight into the story, was that the huge contracts that players have gotten, even if they're not guaranteed and as much as they are in other sports, that had an impact. This makes guys maybe a little less hungry, maybe a little more selfish. I'm not exactly sure how you would characterize it, but I think that's something that sort of becomes evident in this new era versus the era that Gibbs was so successful in.
Well, I think that holds true right along the line. I think from high school sports through college and now in the pros, it's a different type of athlete that's playing, and you're exactly right. There's all kinds of restrictions, how much you can practice, what you can do, and the threatening aspect now with the guaranteed salaries, you go and they stay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, someone said that I was watching something or reading something, I can't exactly remember, but these kids who come into the high school, or big high school recruits, they're already stars and celebrities before they even set foot on their college campus. They've got their own web pages, and they've got so many coaches, drooling over them, and they have these big, announcements where they announce where they've decided to sign their letter of intent. I don't think it was quite like that 30 or 40 years ago. It was more of an earning your keep slowly and a long time before you ever did anything. And, if you look at just free agency, that's a lot of what free agency is. Guys getting paid for what they can do instead of what they have done. So I think that was, that's sort of a nice little preview of how things have changed, I think.
Adam Lazarus joining us. Hail to the Redskins is the name of the book. And I grew up in New York, Don. I know you remember this player. Of course, he had some success with the Jets, but really made a name for himself with the Redskins. Talking about John Riggins, the running back. Really almost had a second-act career with the Redskins, didn't he?
Yeah, Riggins is the only player in NFL history to rush for more yards in his 30s than he did in his 20s, and I think that's the best example of how much more valuable he became as he spent more time in the league. It's interesting. I think we look at running backs. It's almost like by the time they get to be 25, 26, they're on the downside of their career. Well, Riggins made his greatest contributions after he turned 30. So I think he was a one-of-a-kind character in terms of that, and off the field, he was a kind of a goofy guy. He was a funny guy, very charismatic, but he was a sort of an oddball figure, and I think that's what drew a lot of people to him from a fan perspective. He's probably the most popular Redskin player of all time.
Fell asleep somewhere. Where I forget the story.
Was it the White House he fell asleep, or?
Yeah, he was at a dinner for, it was like a congressional honoring of, it was like a correspondence dinner that we have today.
That's right, yeah.
He didn't just exactly fall asleep. And,
he had a few.
Yeah, he said later that he famously told Sandra Day O'Connor to loosen up, baby.
That's right. I remember
that. He later said that moment would almost be more memorable. They write his eulogy or his in the newspapers after he passes away. That would be more memorable than the Super Bowl MVP he won, because that had gotten so much attention. But yeah, that was kind of the other half of the coin with Riggins. He was the character.
Well, Adam, we couldn't have you on without asking about the controversial story. What's going to happen with the nickname the Redskins?
Well, I can't tell you what's going to happen. If I had to guess, I think that the ownership and the very ardent fan base is going to drive this all the way to the end. I don't think they want to change the name, and it does set a bad precedent for the league or whoever to step in and tell a team to change their team name. Personally, I think that they're better off changing the name. It sort of cures a lot of their problems from a PR standpoint, and I think it's going to happen eventually. It's a story that's never going to go away. 20 years from now, if they don't change their name, nothing is going to change. People are still going to want them to change it. So I think they're better off just sort of cutting the tie now and starting over. But I can understand, I can appreciate those people who don't want to change the names, don't want to change the history and things like that. But if this is enough of a headache and a distraction and it bothers enough people, I think it's probably best to move on.
Is it still, you haven't heard as much about it going into this season as last year. It seemed to have more impetus behind it.
Last year there was actually some, political posturing on the story.
Right.
There's been some sort of veiled threats that are not going to be able to get a new stadium. They're not going to renew the current stadium. They'll never get to move back to D.C., which has been something they've talked about. They're in Maryland now and talking about a new stadium. They're never going to get any kind of chance to get it in D.C. if they don't make the change. I know that a lot of senators wrote a letter to the commissioner of the NFL asking them to change the name. Even President Obama said something a couple of years ago that he thought it was probably best for them to change the name. But these things, probably they'll come back to it when they're ready. Someone will bring the story up again, and then again it'll be a headache for the team and the front office and the organization. And I think that's one of the reasons why I think they're better off to just move on.
Doug, let's give everybody an idea who we're speaking with and about the new book.
Adam Lazarus is with us. Hail to the Redskins is the name of the book about the Joe Gibbs years. And we mentioned some of the quarterbacks that have played for the Redskins. And we down here, Adam, I moved down to the Tampa Bay area when Doug Williams was here with the Buccaneers, and really did not have a lot of success down here. Nobody really has, except for that 1 year where they won it all. But went up to Washington, had probably the greatest one quarter any quarterback ever had in a Super Bowl, didn't he?
Yeah, that whole team had the greatest single quarter in history of football, probably, especially when you consider the stage that they were on. Doug is a huge figure in this book. Like you said, the Tampa years, a lot of ups and downs, and he was actually basically out of the NFL for several years. When he went to Washington, became a backup quarterback and was on the bench, and sort of just got thrust into the starting job, and made for a great story, a real Hollywood story, with him going in there, being the first African-American quarterback to start the Super Bowl and playing. He even got to the day before, he had a root canal. He had an emergency root canal the day before the game. They thought he might not be able to play. He got injured during the first quarter, thought he might not be able to play, and he goes in and has this 4-touchdown performance, and the Redskins score 35 points in the second quarter and blow out Denver, wins the MVP, and he's still enormous figure in Washington today, all these years later.
Give us an update on RG3. You're right there.
Well, I wouldn't. It's interesting. I don't think I think his career in Washington is going to be over come the end of the season. But I've even seen some things now with Dallas' quarterback's hurt, and the Eagles are having some question marks at quarterbacks. I was even seeing someone suggested trading RG3 to Dallas or Philadelphia, which sure would make for an interesting story if he ever got on the field against Washington later on this year. But I think, all things being equal, if nothing else happens, it's probably going to be time to part ways with him at the end of the year. I think things are just sort of unsalvageable at this point, and there's a lot of money involved, and I think the fan base is really torn on things, and they're probably going to have to just cut the cord also on that.
Well, is he 2 or 3 now? Is he the backup quarterback, or is he the third quarterback?
He wasn't even dressed this week, I don't think. He's the third quarterback. There's some sentiments as whether or not it's his health or if it's his ability or what. So it's a lot of mystery there, and that's one of the reasons why keeping these sort of soiled relationships as long as you can only hurt the teams. I think that's one of the reasons why, if they can move him, I think they're probably going to try to.
Doug?
We'll wrap you up with one more, Adam. After doing this book, how would you rank this group of Redskin teams under the Joe Gibbs regime against, the 49ers dynasty, the Cowboys couple of dynasties, even the Giants dynasty? Would you put it right up there in that top 5, or how would you rank them?
The Super Bowl era, I think it's probably in that small group, maybe the top 5 or so, like you said. I do think, don't discount the fact that this team didn't have a great quarterback, or didn't have an all-time great quarterback. Everybody, when we talk about the great dynasties, we talk about Bart Starr and the Packers, or Staubach and the Cowboys, or Bradshaw and the Steelers, or Montana and the 49ers, or today Brady and the Patriots. I think that a lot of people don't put that Redskins dynasty in the same class because they didn't have that quarterback, and even if they had 3 different quarterbacks win the 3 Super Bowls. But in terms of team, the 22 guys on the field and the coaches and everything in that you consider when you're considering a team, there were few better during the Super Bowl era than those Redskins teams. And I think, especially, I spent a lot of time in this book talking about the last Super Bowl team, the 91 team. That was one of the greatest single-season teams in the history of the NFL. And again, it's the same reason. I don't think they get the same credit they deserve compared to, a Montana team or a Bradshaw team or a Peyton Manning team, because they didn't have the superstars. They didn't have a ton of superstars, and they definitely didn't have a superstar quarterback. So I think that hurts them in terms of reputation, but in terms of on-the-field greatness, there were few better.
I would agree with that. I think they were more of a lunch pail team. They all came to work and did the job, but they weren't necessarily being singled out every game as superstars.
Yeah, it was, in a lot of ways, it was a different group or a different player or a different few players every week that helped lead them to all those victories. Riggins was a great figure for the early years, and Doug Williams got a lot of attention the second time around. But, throughout the course of the season and the course of a 10 or 12-year stretch, it was so many different guys. They were, truly a team in that way.
How about following George Allen? Do you have any comments about George?
I think he was, in a way, he was a great sort of figure for the opposite of Gibbs. I think he was a much more fiery guy,
Right.
helped develop that great rivalry with Dallas that still continues today. I don't think it was nearly as strong before George Allen, and it certainly was, at its peak in the 80s and 90s when Gibbs was there, first when Tom Landry was the coach, and then started getting going again when Jimmy Johnson became the Cowboys coach. But I think, you credit George Allen for that, and I think, there's different ways to skin a cat, and I think George Allen had tremendous success with a real firebrand, believing in veterans, trusting, the older guys to make the plays and to be the ones out there making decisions. Gibbs was much more trusting of younger guys. He developed so many great players over the years. And, I guess just, again, with the personality, his was much more laid back, much more sort of cerebral in a way. I think he didn't let emotions get in the way of things a lot. And that was kind of the opposite of George Allen. But certainly for a 20 or 30-year stretch for the Redskins to have those two coaches is pretty amazing.
Yeah. Well, the name of the book is Hail to the Redskins, Gibbs, the Diesel, the Hogs, and the Glory Days of DC's Football Dynasty. We've been talking with Adam Lazarus on the show tonight. Again, the book published by William Morrow. And Adam, really appreciate you taking the time to join us, and please keep in touch with us any future books. But great job on history of really one of the great teams in NFL history.
Thanks a lot for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I agree, and we certainly enjoy talking about the Redskins as much as any team in the National Football League.